Should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave, platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control.
The Section 230 that she's talking about there is part of the Communications Decency Act. It's a federal law that protects social media platforms from liability for the content that people post. Basically, X, Facebook, etc. can't be sued for content that appears on their sites. Clinton is just the latest in a long list of US politicians that have sought to limit its scope. According to the Congressional Research Service, more than a dozen proposals have been introduced in Congress in the past few years to limit Section 230. However, none have passed. That could change, though, as the desire to control the narrative becomes desperate. Just last month, former Secretary of State John Kerry let the world know that far from being the solution, social media is the problem.
The dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today.
Doesn't sound that bad, right? Well, here's the kicker. The real anguish for elite politicians like Kerry is that without controls on social media, people can, shock horror, choose where they get their information from. And nobody wants that.
People self-select where they go for their news or for their information, and then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have some accountability on facts, etc.
Hillary Clinton wants to start a criminal crackdown on those considered to be spreading misinformation ahead of next month's presidential election.
I think it's important to indict the Russians, just as Mueller indicted a lot of Russians who were engaged in direct election interference and boosting Trump back in 2016. But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence.
The legacy media has started flapping around, realizing it's lost its control.
We owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying.
And why are they so up in arms? Because the idea that someone else could have influence is scary as hell to them.
TikTok is able to collect massive amounts of personal data. We all know that. That means it could, if it desired, to use this data to influence narratives and trends, create misinformation campaigns, encourage self-destructive behavior, purposefully allow drug cartels to communicate freely and organize human and drug trafficking. And to be fair, all social media companies could do that. But here's the difference. It is only TikTok that is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. All these other social media companies are not.
This is not just a security concern for the United States. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, the European Union have all prohibited TikTok on their government phones because of fear of being spied. But I don't think we should sit by and allow in effect, a media presence that is 5 or 10x the size of NPR to potentially be broadcasting Chinese propaganda in an election year.
TikTok has repeatedly chosen the path for more control, more surveillance, and more manipulation. Your platform should be banned.